Steve, you talk a lot to senior level people within organisations about data management, but why don't they just go and start off by asking the IT department to handle this issue?
I think there's a couple of answers to that question. I think in certain circumstances they do, and they're disappointed with the outcome that they receive. I also think that there is a general perception in the business community that data is purely an IT issue. But really, IT are qualified to store data, secure data, move data from place to place. But when it comes to content, they don't really have the business insight necessary to really be able to tell if the data is fit for purpose. And I see MDM really as business people recognising this fact and taking ownership, again, of the data, which in fact prior to IT existing, business people looked after their own data quite happily.
Are you making a big distinction then between the harvesting and the storage of data and the use and meaning of data for, I suppose, a very meaningful, insightful purpose?
Absolutely. I mean, to give you a really trivial example, let's just take a customer's address. So I have a customer's address, it's held on my database. Now, if I'm sitting in the IT function, I think it's perfectly reasonable that I can validate that that address has a sensible structure. It's probably got a number and then some text. I can validate that it has a postcode, that postcode has the correct structure. I can probably also validate that the postcode and the address actually relate to the same place. The critical point for me, though, is I don't believe it's reasonable to expect the IT department to know whether that particular address is the correct address that I've agreed to transact business with my customer at. So is that the right place to send them an invoice? Is that the right place to send them a remittance advice? And this to me is exactly where the MDM scope falls between business and IT. So really, it's the person in the business community who's transacting that business who's best placed to know that that's the accurate piece of data. And therefore, in my view, they should be accountable for capturing that data to a sufficient level of quality as the business requires.
What's the biggest issue that a business might encounter if they simply leave it up to their IT departments to handle and manage all of their data?
Well, I think you could ask any business person and they'll almost certainly say, our data quality is not all that great. We have multiple versions of the same customer. We have the same product on our databases lots of times with slightly different names. We have multiple versions of our chart of accounts. I mean, one of my clients recently told me they'd uncovered something like 26 versions of a chart of accounts across their enterprise. So I think there's lots of understanding in general terms within the business community that data quality is poor. I think one of the things we can help with is translate that into what it means for business. I don't think there's a huge amount of value in managing data well just for the sake of managing data well. I think it's all about understanding where in your data asset the real win might be and putting your effort into maintaining that portion of the data asset to a high level of quality.
So in your experience, what's the biggest benefit that you believe an organisation will get when they stop seeing data as an IT issue and start really taking that into the heart of their business?
Well, I think it will allow them to circumvent some of the problems that they found quite intractable historically, and I think we'll talk about some of those a bit later on. And it might also allow them to exploit some new opportunities. Certainly with the advent of the internet, with social media, there's a much greater expectation from consumers that corporations are going to share data with them. And so I think there's a big reputational opportunity and threat for organisations as they start to reveal their data content to their customers. If it's not accurate, I think there are some dangers that will have an adverse reputational impact.
So if you had one opportunity to make a plea to any company to move the management of data outside of just their IT departments, what would you want to say to them?
I think I would say that I view data management as a back office activity. I don't see it as a frontline activity. However, I think if you look at something like, I don't know, accounts payable, You know, I think the expectation is that most organisations will do accounts payable reasonably well, that their suppliers will get paid reasonably promptly, and therefore they'll have a good reputation within their vendor community, and that will enable them to transact business in a fairly straightforward manner. If they don't do accounts payable well, their suppliers will be unhappy, that will cause them problems in supply, and that will continue on down the value chain to the customer ultimately. I think the same thing applies to data. There's no reason nowadays why an organisation can't do a reasonable back office job maintaining its master data to a sufficient level of quality to allow the business to run in a streamlined way.
If you're new to this series and perhaps about to embark on a big SAP or globalization program, then do sign up for the rest of the series to get all of Steve's insights. Just press that button on the screen now. And don't forget, you've got all of the contact details there too if you've got any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share.